Some men are born guilty. Others are made guilty by the system. But Daniel Crowe, his story fit neither. He was a man who carried death wherever he went. 1987, Colorado. A cold, gray morning. The iron gates of Blackridge Prison creaked open with a grinding sound. The last noise from the outside world was the angry cawing of crows. The prison's gray walls seemed to have absorbed years of suffering. Every footstep on the concrete floors echoed like a tombstone cracking. At 6:30 a.m., a man in chains entered the prison yard. His head was bowed, eyes fixed on the ground. According to his file, his name was Daniel Crowe, 36 years old, convicted of murder. But this wasn't his first prison, and it probably wouldn't be his last. Head guard Samuel Brooks frowned as he reviewed the man's file. He had been held in 4 different prisons. Riverside Prison for 8 months. 3 cellmates had died mysteriously. Cedar Hill for 6 months. 2 more deaths. He could only stay 4 months at Ironwood. Even in that short time, 1 person had lost their life. Each time, official reports cited natural causes like heart attacks and respiratory failure. But the autopsies were full of contradictions. The bodies showed unexplained traces of coldness, abnormal slowing of blood circulation, and strangest of all, they looked as if their life energy had been completely drained. Prison records remained silent. Guards wouldn't talk, but the inmates, they whispered about him in hushed tones. Death comes with him. When young guard Mike asked the warden why this man was constantly being transferred, the warden closed the file and took a deep breath. The official reason was listed as security risk. The real reason would never make it into any files. The cold embrace of cell block 6. Daniel walked through the coldest corridor of Blackridge Prison. The walls were painted lead gray, but most of the paint had peeled away. Fluorescent lights flickered irregularly. When the door to cell block 6 opened, the air that escaped hit Daniel's face. It was cold, humid, and carried a strange odor. It wasn't mold. It wasn't rotting flesh either. It was more like the smell of fear. His cellmate, Troy Williams, sat on the bunk in the corner. He was 42 years old, broad-shouldered, with thinning hair. He was serving 12 years for robbery and had been living here for 2 years. When he stood up upon seeing Daniel, he looked into Daniel's eyes for the first time. In that moment, Troy's blood ran cold. Daniel's eyes. There was a deep darkness within them, as if they absorbed light. Daniel quietly introduced himself and placed his belongings on his bunk. Looking out the window, he noticed there were unusually many crows in the prison yard, as if something was drawing them there. The first night, dark whispers. At 11 p.m., the lights went out in Blackridge Prison. In cell block 6, only the dim light from the corridor remained. Troy lay on his bunk, trying to listen to Daniel. Daniel appeared to be sleeping, his eyes closed, but his breathing was normal. However, after a few minutes, he began making strange sounds. First, just murmurs, then incomprehensible words. It sounded like Latin, but no one knew Daniel was that educated. The words, Veni ad me, tenebrae, tenebrae me vocant, echoed through the cell. At 3:06 a.m., the fluorescent lights in the cell suddenly began flickering. 1, 2, 3, it lasted 10 seconds, then returned to normal. Troy had gotten up and looked at Daniel. His eyes were still closed, but his lips were moving, as if he was talking to someone. Daniel's eyes suddenly opened, but those eyes weren't the ones Troy had seen before. The pupils were so large they appeared black. He spoke in his normal voice, saying he was just chatting with old friends. Troy's blood froze. Old friends? Weren't they all dead? Strange beginnings. The next morning, seeing Daniel return to his normal state, Troy felt somewhat relieved. During breakfast, sitting together, Troy tried to learn more about him. Daniel mentioned he had previously stayed at Riverside, Cedar Hill, Ironwood, and one other prison, being transferred from all of them. The reason was always the same. His friends were bothering them. When Troy asked what friends he was talking about, Daniel smiled. But that smile sent fear through Troy's heart. He said they were the kind of friends Troy wouldn't be able to see. That day, strange events began occurring in the prison. Inmates passing near cell block 6 noticed the temperature dropping in that area. Some were shivering for no reason, while others began praying when passing by Daniel. On the third night, Troy began having terrible nightmares. In a dark room, black silhouettes surrounded him. None of the silhouettes had faces, but they were all looking at him. In his dream, one of the silhouettes approached him, its hand touching Troy's throat. "Cold, so cold. You'll be with us soon," whispered a voice like breaking glass. When Troy woke up, he felt a real coldness on his throat. He was having trouble breathing. He got up and looked at Daniel. He seemed to be sleeping, but something was moving under his bunk. When he illuminated it with his flashlight, there was nothing there, but on the floor were scratch marks. Deep scratch marks carved into the concrete floor. When he woke Daniel, he too saw the marks, and fear appeared on his face, as if he was seeing them for the first time. He said he never did such things, that they were the ones who did this work. But who were they? On the fourth day, the prison experienced a power outage. The generators were running, but only cell block 6 wasn't receiving electricity. While other cells had light, only cell block 6 was in darkness. When electrician Davis came to cell block 6 to fix the problem, he opened the electrical panel and saw an astonishing sight. The cables looked burned, but there were no signs of fire, only black stains. When Davis stood near Daniel, he felt something strange, like an electrical charge. But this wasn't warm, it was cold electricity. Daniel finally gave Troy an honest answer. These kinds of things always happened. They didn't like electricity, and they had been with him since he was 17 years old. True face of fear. On the fifth night, the electricity still hadn't been restored. Only candles burned in cell block 6. Shadows danced on the walls. At 2:30 a.m., the temperature in the cell suddenly dropped. Troy's breath began to show. Strange sounds came from Daniel's bunk, rattles, whispers, and multiple voices, as if several people were talking at once. When Troy approached Daniel, what he saw would freeze him. Daniel's eyes were open but completely black. There were no whites of his eyes. His lips were moving, but the voices came from different places, as if there were other people in the room. "Soon, soon it will end," someone whispered. "He is ours, he is ours," another added. "Just wait a little longer," a third voice echoed. Troy had backed away. When he placed his hand on Daniel's shoulder, it was cold, dead cold. All the voices suddenly stopped. Daniel's eyes returned to normal. There was real fear on his face. He said they were getting stronger, that Troy should stay away from them. The first victim, Troy's end. On the sixth day, Troy couldn't get up in the morning. He was breathing, but very weakly. His eyes were open, but couldn't focus, as if his soul had left his body. When guard Mike saw the situation, he immediately called the doctor. When Dr. Martinez examined Troy, he found that his pulse was very weak and his body temperature was below normal. But he couldn't understand why. They took Troy to the hospital. That night at 3:06 a.m., he passed away. The cause of death was unknown. There was nothing wrong with his heart or lungs, but it was as if his life energy had been exhausted. A nurse on duty at the hospital described Troy's final moments. His eyes were open, but he wasn't seeing anything. His lips were moving as if he was talking to someone. His last words were, They're coming. They're coming. The second victim, Marcus's arrival. In cell block 6 of Blackridge Prison, Daniel Crowe welcomed new inmate Marcus Chen. Daniel looked at him with sad eyes and told him he should request another cell. Marcus said he didn't believe in superstitions and would stay. Daniel wished it was just superstition. On the 8th night, Marcus wanted to learn about Daniel's past. Daniel finally decided to talk. When he was 17 in 1970, he lost his mother. At that time, he was a very angry, lost child. He and his school friends Eddie, Michael, Sarah, and David had found a strange old leather-bound book containing spells for talking to the dead. That night, 5 people met in the forest near an old cemetery. They lit candles, drew a circle, and read the words from the book. The air changed. It became very cold. The candles went out, but they weren't alone in the darkness. They heard voices, whispers. Sarah screamed first. Daniel ran. The next morning, 5 bodies were found with no wounds. They were just dead. Daniel had been chosen that night. He made a deal with the dark entities. They wouldn't take his life, but in return, they would take everyone close to him. On the 10th night, Marcus could no longer sleep. He felt other entities in the room. His breathing became difficult, his body temperature dropping. Marcus looked at the dark corner of the cell and saw a silhouette emerge from the shadows. Human-shaped, but with no details, just pure darkness. As the entity approached, the temperature dropped even more. The entity whispered in a voice like 1,000 people speaking at once, saying it had been waiting a long time, that it wanted Marcus, his soul, his life, his energy. Daniel explained through tears that he had an agreement. If he interfered, he would be next. When the entity touched Marcus's face, that touch was colder than ice. The last thing Marcus saw were the entity's red eyes. The second death, and growing suspicions. Marcus was found dead in the morning. Just like Troy, there was no explanation. His heart had stopped, but why? When Dr. Martinez encountered such a case for the second time, he fell into serious doubt. This couldn't be a coincidence. Guard Brooks suggested moving Daniel to another cell because everyone who shared a cell with him was dying. But Daniel refused transfer. He said wherever he went, the same thing would happen. The third victim, Jake Morrison. Jake Morrison, 35, convicted of assault charges, was brought to cell block 6. He was strong, aggressive, and afraid of nothing. Daniel tried to explain the situation, but Jake didn't take his words seriously. At 3:06 a.m., Jake began having nightmares. In his dream, he saw dark silhouettes with faces. Troy's face, Marcus's face, and dozens of others he didn't recognize. They were all reaching toward him, asking for help. As days passed, Jake's condition deteriorated. His strong body was weakening. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. The truth revealed. Father Nolan discovered the entity was getting stronger with each life it took. Daniel had felt responsible all these years, but the truth was, he was also a victim. The entity was keeping him alive while making him suffer. On the 15th night, Jake's end came. In his final dream, the entity told him the truth. Daniel isn't guilty. He's just a door. You're all just souls I feed on. The final night, breaking the curse. With Father Nolan's help, Daniel prepared his final plan. He had memorized the ancient words needed to break the agreement. At 3:06 a.m., the entity emerged with full power. No longer a shadow, but with red eyes, sharp teeth, and an ice-cold touch. When Daniel began the ritual, the entity was enraged. The temperature dropped below 0. "You can't do this," the entity snarled. "We made a deal." Daniel continued speaking the ancient words.
Tenebrae, revertere, anima mea pro omnibus.
Each word weakened the entity. It grabbed Daniel's throat with ice-cold fingers. But Daniel whispered his final words.
liberati sunt ego autem morior.
A flash of light illuminated cell block 6. The entity screamed as it returned to darkness. Daniel lay on the floor, eyes closed, not breathing. When guards found Daniel dead in the morning, there was a peaceful expression on his face. Cell block 6 returned to normal from that day on. The entity had returned to darkness forever. Daniel's body was buried in a cemetery where his name was unknown. But Father Nolan left flowers there every month. Daniel had saved dozens of innocent lives by sacrificing himself. He had broken the curse. There was only peace.